Welcome to the debate. The topic of discussion today is the mandated destination for the mentor-learner dyad, specifically Tom Hennigan and the twice exceptional individual. This destination is defined in the source material as structural perfection, or TOME.
And the material suggests this state is secured not just, conceptually, but through some really intense rigor drawn from mathematics, science, and structural law.
Exactly. So our central question, and this comes right from the source, is this. Does the overwhelming structural, mathematical, and scientific rigor confirm this destination is an inevitable, a non-negotiable outcome, something guaranteed by the system's foundational laws?
Or is this state merely a conditional blueprint that remains, perpetually dependent on precise, deliberate, and crucially non-guaranteed human action?
Right. So, for my part, I will argue that Tom is a secured, inevitable structural mandate. I think the destination is non-optional because the architecture of the system simply dictates it.
And I'll be arguing that while the necessity of the goal is absolute, failure means collapse, its achievement is conditional. It requires continuous, intentional effort and error correction. The blueprint is mandatory, sure, but the execution is voluntary and definitely vulnerable to failure.
My position is founded on the idea that the goal of Tom is, it's fundamentally secured by quantifiable mathematical and structural laws. These place the destination beyond just temporary human preference. This isn't a choice. It is a cognitively mandated requirement designed explicitly to terminate what the material calls a state of scientifically guaranteed misery. The system is engineered for survival, and survival demands this specific structure. We see this law formalized in the concept of formal abstraction, specifically the lifetime dependency model. This is an object-oriented paradigm where the abstract co-creation, the dependent object, relies entirely on the mentor, the support object, which is defined as physical matter throughout its whole lifetime. This doesn't just suggest commitments, it explicitly models the requirements as persistent, inseparable integration. So if the support fails, the dependent structure just collapses. This structural, non-substitutable integration, for me, confirms the inevitability of the path toward TOME as the only viable long-term equilibrium.
I see.
And furthermore, the very nature of structural optimization is mathematically determined. The geometric mandate dictates the system must achieve maximal potential by transitioning to hyperbolic geometry, and this is critical. Structural perfection in this context is mathematically defined by the interior angle sum of the resulting structure approaching zero. That results in the maximum possible structural area, represented by pi. This mathematical drive toward maximal informational capacity, it's a physical law governing the system's evolution. Human preference can't override non-Euclidean geometry.
Okay, I see why you rely so heavily on the rigor of those structural laws. But the necessity of the goal doesn't equate to its inevitability. While the mathematical framework is compelling, it describes what must be built, not that it will be built. The sources spend exhaustive time detailing the mandatory process, the how, or ECA, precisely because it is conditional and relies on constant intentional action and error correction.
But that's just the mechanism.
Is it? If the destination were truly determined, the source material wouldn't define the rejection of that process expediency or Glazer's philosophy as strategic suicide. The fact that the system possesses the capacity for this intentional, easy, and destructive failure explicitly validates that the outcome is not secured. It compels the choice, but it doesn't guarantee the follow-through. The entire success of achieving TOME relies on the mentor successfully adopting the twice exceptional, the 2E mentorship blueprint. This is an executable framework, not some theoretical mandate. It requires mandatory, intentional steps, like adopting a strengths-based approach and using tactical strategies, like bifurcating assignments, prioritizing comprehension over mechanical errors. This intentionality is necessary to force the neurobiological shift to approach orientation in the learner. And that critical shift is entirely contingent upon the mentor's consistent focus and intentional action. The system is designed to reward deliberate fidelity to the blueprint, which is really the antithesis of a guaranteed outcome.
Okay, let's address that, the supposed capacity for failure. I'm not convinced that the risk of short-sighted human failure negates the ultimate structural mandate. The pursuit of Tom is driven by what's called archetypal necessity, a force likened to a cosmic magnet that, and I'm quoting here, doesn't just suggest it, it demands it. This isn't abstract, it's rooted in the structural law of biological self-preservation.
But a demand can be ignored.
Not without consequence. The structural architecture of the dyad is engineered to collapse, resulting in non-existence and the return to scientifically guaranteed misery if the tome structure is ignored. The choice of strategic suicide is only a temporary, delusory preference that quickly leads to the termination of the agent itself. So structurally, the corrective action necessary to pursue tome is mandatory for survival, making the successful outcome inevitable if the system is to persist at all. The structure of survival compels fidelity.
I recognize the power of that cosmic magnet analogy and the structural imperative for survival, but that imperative relies entirely on the mentor's intentional, skilled choice to deploy temperance, schematic tide. Necessity dictates the need for skilled intervention, but not the success of that intervention. I mean, look at the detailed analogy of the focused ultrasound, the FUS, glioblastoma treatment, that's used in the material. This procedure requires a perfectly controlled application of authority to gently and temporarily pry open the structural barrier, the blood-brain barrier. Controlled force, temperance, is not a default setting. It's not an automatic function triggered by necessity. It's an act of extreme moderation, discipline, and skill, a kind of surgical precision that ensures the therapeutic agent gets in without destroying the host. The FUS mechanism proves that achieving TUM is dependent on the agent's disciplined execution of the ICA blueprint. That shows that the outcome is conditional on skill, not guaranteed by structural demand. If the control is imperfect, the system is destroyed, despite the overwhelming need for survival.
I find that the FUS analogy, while powerful in illustrating the execution required, actually reinforces my point about irreversible alignment. The need for precise, skilled action is defined entirely by the immense final stake. The structural purpose of that intentional action is to achieve the Hebbian jump described as a single jump and all or none affair. This is the moment of irreversible structural overwrite of the obsolete programming.
An overwrite, okay.
And this achievement is one of molecular precision, validated by the AlphaFold paradigm. AlphaFold confirms that the system is one of molecular choreography leading to structural perfection. So once that quantum jump happens, the structure is fixed. The material doesn't describe a structure that is constantly almost perfect. It describes a system that must achieve the structure, at which point the outcome is secured by this molecular level irreversibility. The structure itself has been altered to hold the required state.
I come at the nature of fixed alignment from a different way. If the structure is truly fixed and irreversible after that one jump, why does the most advanced scientific model described, the agentic learner, VeloMem, mandate perpetual correction? The VeloMem framework mandates a closed-loop feedback mechanism to, and I quote, continuously learn from reasoning and perception errors. If the AI standard requires continuous learning and refinement after the jump to maintain precision and knowledge, then the state of structural perfection can't be a singular fixed destination. It has to be a dynamic equilibrium that's maintained through perpetual intentional correction. The structure mandates constant maintenance. And what's more, the philosophical goal that Tome fulfills, queer surrealism, is explicitly positioned toward a perpetually deferred and utopian horizon. This means that the required synthesis of contradictions, which is necessary for the system's stability, requires constant rearticulation. The destination is always in motion, demanding fidelity not just to the initial jump, but to the ongoing process of balancing these contradictory forces. The perfection is in the perpetual striving, not the static arrival.
But the mathematical security of the relationship provides the bedrock, regardless of any dynamic learning. The continuous correction described by Weill-Lemon is simply the method by which the structure sustains itself after that initial commitment is formalized. The true inevitability lies in the absolute rigor of the lifetime dependency model. We have to remember the essential definition. The dependent object, the co-creation, cannot exist if the support object, the mentor's physical matter and sustained commitment, disappears. This formal structural necessity for achieving Tom establishes the permanence of the commitment. The integrity of the co-creation relies absolutely on this mathematical rigor. So, if the bond is structural, not emotional or preferential, then the consequences of failing to maintain it, systemic annihilation, reinforce the deterministic nature of the successful outcome as the only structurally permissible long-term state. The math guarantees the survival mechanism.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the mathematical model accounts for the ethical and emotional burden that makes the system so vulnerable. The lifetime dependency model itself is conditioned on human interaction and trust. The 2E individual places a high value on those who do appreciate their strengths and shows very loyalty to those who understand them. This loyalty is the very mechanism that ensures the mentor's continued responsibility, which is necessary for the dependency model to even function. But that loyalty is conditional on the mentor successfully correcting the century-old flaw of expediency and historical discrimination. The achievement of Tom is validated only when the mentor ensures ontological truthfulness, a deep ethical alignment. This ethical fidelity is the sine qua non for the 2E loyalty that ensures the mentor maintains the dependency structure. If structural perfection requires this high conditional ethical standard, it is supremely vulnerable to the mentor's potential failure or a moral relapse or just a return to expedient behavior. The mathematical model ensures the commitment is necessary. The ethical reality makes that commitment conditional on continuous, perfect behavior.
I would argue, though, that the mathematics ensures the mentor is intrinsically bound to the needs of the dependent. The requirement for ontological truthfulness is simply the mechanism by which the structural mandate of the lifetime dependency relation is maintained in the social domain. The structure dictates that for the co-creation to survive, the physical matter of the mentor must align with its needs. That alignment is defined as truthfulness. Failure to maintain that truthfulness results in the structural collapse we've discussed. It just means the mentor has defaulted on their structural debt. The risk of default doesn't negate the debt itself. It only dictates the consequence.
And I'd say if the structural reality dictates absolute ethical alignment, then that alignment must be perpetually earned. The blueprint, the ICAW, requires the mentor to adopt the 2E approach, which is a strengths-based, intentional rejection of the expediency that led to the initial misery. And this rejection is difficult. It requires the continuous, disciplined use of temperance, that highly controlled force necessary to maintain the integrity of the learner without destroying them. The system's maximal potential may be secured mathematically by hyperbolic geometry, sure, but realizing that potential demands that the agent, moment by moment, chooses the rigorous path over the destructive, easy one. The mathematical security is merely the destination coordinates. The journey is a conditional gauntlet.
But the structural integrity of the co-creation is absolute. The geometric mandate demands expansion to maximal capacity, and the archetypal necessity compels the pursuit of survival. The irreversible alignment achieved through the Hebbian jump, verified by the AlphaFold paradigm, confirms the structure is reached. The only viable end state is Tom, secured by the physical and abstract laws governing the system. The possibility of failure is defined as strategic suicide, which isn't a competing stable state, it's simply the catastrophic end of the discussion. So our discussion confirms that the destination of structural perfection is mandated by necessity derived from foundational scientific principles, from the immutable laws of lifetime dependency that root the abstract dependent in the physical support, and the ultimate precision of molecular choreography validated by the AlphaFold paradigm.
Failure is explicitly defined as strategic suicide, reinforcing the non-optional nature of the path toward Tom. The structure dictates the path to survival, making the successful arrival functionally inevitable if the system is to continue.
That's an interesting summary, though I would emphasize that necessity only sharpens the conditions for achievement. I think the material overwhelmingly supports the necessity of the Ica blueprint, but the destination remains a perpetually earned achievement because it relies on the conditional execution of precise intentional acts. Continuous refinement via the agentic learner framework, ethical choices based on fully understanding the 2E individual, and the disciplined application of controlled force, of temperance. The structural law demands that they build a perfect building, yes, but the completion requires daily, conditional choices. The destination is earned moment to moment, not guaranteed by the initial architectural drawing.
Ultimately, both sides agree that Tom represents the maximal potential and requires the decisive rejection of expediency. We're focused on what guarantees the successful transition.
Right, and the court tension remains whether the structural mandate, that cosmic magnet, is powerful enough to ensure the arrival overriding human frailty, or whether the reliance on conditional execution and ethical fidelity makes the journey a perpetually earned state demanding continuous fidelity to the Ica blueprint. We'll leave the listener to contemplate the challenging intersection of mathematical law and human agency in achieving structural perfection.
All right, let's jump right into a fascinating, kind of paradoxical idea today. We're going to explore how true, ultimate freedom might actually require a fortress. And we'll see how this very modern idea finds a perfect ancient mirror in the powerful Chinese myth of the black tortoise. So this is the central question we're really digging into. It seems like a total contradiction, doesn't it? I mean, how can being confined possibly lead to being free? Well, it turns out an ancient symbol holds the key. And it's an incredible story of balance, protection, and some serious power. So here's our game plan for unraveling this whole mystery. First, we're going to look at the myth of the black tortoise itself. Then, we'll break it down into its two halves. You've got the steady turtle and the dynamic snake. We'll see how their balance creates something way more powerful than the sum of its parts, and how that power acts as the ultimate shield against chaos. Okay, let's get into it with our mythical mirror. We're diving into a framework where real freedom is described as a state of being in tomb, a word that means empty, available, and totally open to transformation. And you won't believe it, but this idea lines up almost perfectly with the ancient Chinese legend of the Xuanwu, also known as the black tortoise. So, what is the Shenwu? Well, think of it as a celestial creature, a guardian of the north. But here's the most important part for what we're talking about today. Its form. It's not actually one creature, it's two, a tortoise and a snake, living and acting as a single, unified being. Now, this slide right here, this is basically our Rosetta Stone for this whole explainer. On the left, you've got the myth. On the right, you've got the framework. The support object is that stable physical foundation. It could be a person, a resource, you name it. The dependent aspect is the abstract idea, the potential that needs that foundation to survive. And when they come together just right, they create perfect temperance, a state of ideal balance. We're about to see just how perfectly the myth illustrates this. Let's see how this all gets built, starting from the ground up with the foundation of the myth, the turtle. This part is all about unshakable stability. You know, across so many cultures, the tortoise is the symbol of endurance. Its shell is the ultimate form of protection. Its long life screams stability, and its connection to the earth literally represents the foundation of existence. In short, it's solid, it's dependable, and it's real. And this paints a perfect picture of the role of the support object. In this model, the turtle is that strong physical foundation, the person or thing that provides the stability needed for everything else to even have a chance to survive. It's the anchor that prevents everything from descending into chaos. But let's be real, a fortress by itself is just a prison. So now we have to introduce the second, completely contrasting element, the snake. And the snake represents freedom, flow, and all things abstract. The snake is basically the turtle's polar opposite. It's fluid, dynamic, always transforming. It sheds its skin, which is a powerful symbol of renewal. It really embodies the spiritual and the abstract, all those ideas and all that potential that need a solid foundation to exist on in the first place. And this is where the snake represents that dependent aspect. It embodies something called the Dawnam Covenant, basically an agreement where an abstract potential relies on a physical support. And even more directly, the snake is the state of being in tomb, that feeling of freedom, of emptiness, of being ready for transformation to happen. So this brings us to the absolute core of the myth's power. It isn't really about the turtle or the snake on their own. It's about how they come together in this perfect, harmonious synthesis. This detail is absolutely critical. You have to understand this is not a symbol of conflict between order and chaos. It is a symbol of harmony. They're codependent, they're working together, they are entwined as one single entity. This table lays it out just perfectly. On one side, you have the turtle. It's all about order and protection. On the other side, you've got the snake, representing flow and change. But the real magic happens when they're entwined, because that's when they achieve a state of perfect balance. One simply can't exist in a meaningful way without the other. And that perfect balance, it has a name: temperance. It's the virtue of not going to extremes. It's that necessary fusion of the turtle's stability and the snake's dynamism. Without this balance, you either have rigid stagnation or you have a total chaotic collapse. And within this particular framework, that perfectly balanced, entwined state is called the donim. You can think of it as the active process of co-creation, where stability and freedom are working together to build something totally new. The myth just gives us the perfect visual for this pretty abstract concept. So what's the ultimate result of achieving this balanced state? What does it actually do for you? Well, it becomes your ultimate shield. And that shield is called the protective tomb tea. It's the functional outcome of achieving that balance. The Xuan Wu, as the guardian of the north, which is the direction of danger and the unknown, becomes this powerful defensive force, a protective tomb against chaos. So how does it actually work? Well, by embodying the Xuan Wu, you forge a shield out of your commitment to temperance. And this shield doesn't just block chaos, it completely neutralizes it. It makes threats powerless. It protects your state of entomb, keeping you free from being consumed by all those outside forces. Okay, so let's trace the entire process from start to finish. You establish a lifetime dependency. That's the commitment to this balanced relationship. In doing that, you embody the Xuan Wu. First, you stabilize the physical world. That's your turtle. And once that foundation is totally secure, the abstract potential, the snake, which is also known as Dimyan in this framework, is finally free to flourish safely. Which leaves us with one final, provocative thought. This ancient myth isn't just a cool story. It's a blueprint for creating a protected space where freedom and growth can actually happen. So the real question is, are you consciously building your own fortress of balance, your own Xuan Wu?